afternoon. I'm Victoria Marshall with the latest news from the Washington Watch News Desk. Today marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day, where during World War II, Allied forces launched Operation Overlord, an air, land, and sea invasion against German occupying forces to liberate France and make a stand for freedom. The invasion's success was a major turning point for the war. Less than 200 veterans returned to the Normandy beaches this year to commemorate what happened there. For many, this will be their last reunion, as their average age is 100. President Joe Biden took part in the ceremony honoring our veterans, but after thanking them for their courage and sacrifice, he spent much of his speech talking about the war in Ukraine and America's urgent need to save democracy in the region.
The war in Europe didn't end for another 11 months. But here, the tide turned in our favor. Here, we proved the forces of liberty are stronger than the forces of conquest. Here in Europe, we see one stark example. Ukraine has been invaded by a tyrant bent on domination. Ukrainians are fighting with extraordinary courage, suffering great losses, but never backing down. And make no mistake, the autocrats of the world are watching closely to see what happens in Ukraine, to see if we let this illegal aggression go unchecked. We cannot let that happen.
And in Capitol Hill news, yesterday, the House Oversight, Judiciary, and Ways and Means committees sent criminal referrals to the Department of Justice recommending the son and brother of President Biden, Hunter and James, be charged with making false statements to Congress. The referrals argue Hunter and James Biden lied about their business dealings and Joe Biden's knowledge of and role in his family's influence peddling scheme to shield him from Republicans' impeachment inquiry. Here's what Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer told Fox News' Laura Ingraham earlier today.
What Hunter Biden lied about, number one, he lied that he had any association with one of his LLCs called Rosemont Seneca Bohai. This was the company that most of his Ukrainian money flowed through and his Kazakhstani money flowed through, that he got the brand new Porsche, all while Joe Biden was vice president. He also lied about that WhatsApp message that he got from Zhao. He said it was another Zhao, but there was evidence that we submitted that showed this text message went on for a long period of time, and the next day he got a $100,000 wire, and a few days later he got a $5 million wire. This is the WhatsApp message where he said, "My father is sitting beside me," when he was extorting the money from the Chinese national. Now, why would Hunter Biden lie about that, Laura? Because he was protecting Joe Biden. Joe Biden was the central figure in the family's influence peddling ring.
Republicans say James Biden lied to Congress by asserting Joe Biden did not meet with his business associate Tony Bobulinski while pursuing a deal with the Chinese energy company. Text messages and testimony from Hunter Biden prove otherwise. And finally, in border news, the Biden administration is directing Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE agents, to instruct migrants on what to say to qualify for asylum. According to internal emails obtained by the New York Post, ICE officials must install signs in detention facilities that tell migrants if they are trembling or shaking, or even staying completely silent as behavior, that this can back up the credible fear of being deported migrants needed to claim asylum. Also, the signs must say that if migrants are hungry or thirsty, need medical care, or have been victims of abuse, then their asylum claim will be heard. The signs must be translated into 13 different languages, including Spanish and Chinese. A video telling migrants the same thing must also be played on loop in processing centers. The Biden admin's memo to ICE came the same day President Biden signed an executive order restricting access to asylum once illegal migrant encounters top a weekly average of 2,500 per day. This new rule does not apply to those coming as unaccompanied children, victims of human trafficking, and those with a medical or safety emergency. Customs and Border Patrol say the Mexican drug cartels will only abuse these exemptions for their migrant smuggling business. And those are today's headlines. I'm Victoria Marshall. Up next is Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. We'll see you tomorrow with more news.
From the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., bringing compelling interviews, insightful analysis, taking you beyond the headlines and sound bites into conversations with our nation's leaders and newsmakers, all from a biblical worldview. Washington Watch with Tony Perkins starts now.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. They will need thy blessings. Their road will be long and hard. For the enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces. Success may not come with rushing speed, but we shall return again and again. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom.
That was a portion of the prayer that President Franklin D. Roosevelt led the nation in on D-Day. We'll talk with Frank Lunsford, a World War II veteran who fought at Normandy about that day 80 years ago. We'll also talk with Congressman Keith Self, who is in Normandy today, and will join with other military veterans in Congress by marking the special occasion by parachuting from a vintage military transport plane. Author Jerome Corsi also joins me to discuss the evidence of divine intervention and the role that the Christian faith played in World War II. We'll also hear from Mark Levicki, a distinguished scholar of ethics, war, and public life at Providence, and a non-resident research fellow at the U.S. Naval War College, about how America's spiritual strength has been and is intertwined with our military strength and our political standing on the world stage. And along the way, we're going to tackle a couple of news items. House Republicans have made criminal referrals to the Department of Justice for Hunter and James Biden's lying to Congress. Republican leaders say the two were attempting to cover up for President Joe Biden. We're going to talk about that. The website, TonyPerkins.com, lots of resources there for you. Be sure and check it out. Well, it was on June 6, 1944, that more than 160,000 Allied troops landed on the heavily fortified beaches of Normandy in Axis-occupied France to confront the Axis powers head-on. And on this day, 80 years later, we remember those who led that invasion and fought in the Second World War. Earlier today, a congressional delegation spent time in Normandy, and tomorrow we'll actually reenact the historic aerial invasion, which includes a parachute jump from a Douglas C-47 Skytrain. Well, joining me now is Congressman Keith Self, who is a part of this delegation. He serves on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and the House Veterans Affairs Committee. He represents the 3rd Congressional District of Texas. Congressman Self, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me. We've had a great day here.
So earlier today, President Biden spoke. He's there in Normandy. Tell us a little bit about the ceremony and the celebrations thus far.
Well, individually, they brought the World War II veterans onto stage individually. So they got introduced, they got clapped for, applauded. This was a great day, Tony. We have both the living veterans, and then you see that I'm here amongst the gravestones of almost 10,000 Americans who died either on D-Day or soon after D-Day. We've been addressing both today because this is an important place in American history.
It is 80 years ago, but we're losing our history. We're losing an understanding of the importance of standing firm and resolute against the rise of evil. And in many ways, we see a recurrence of what brought about World War II.
And I want to make the point, Tony, that that's why I'm here, both to remember and to make sure that we are worthy of the sacrifice that these men around me here and those men that were on the stage today, that they sacrificed so much. They literally went into a living hell across Omaha Beach to secure freedom for Europe. That's what we need to be worthy of. And I believe that we need to be, we leaders of the nation, the House members that are going to jump tomorrow, we need to do this to simply tell the American people that this is still important. What we are doing here is still important.
Now, you yourself, along with the other members of the delegation that will be jumping tomorrow, are all veterans. You're a decorated veteran. When you stand there at Normandy and you look back 80 years and you look forward to where America stands today, what weighs most on your mind?
What weighs most on my mind is you played part of President Roosevelt's prayer. And he talked about our faith has to be maintained. Our civilization has to be maintained. That's what we're losing today. I say that they're trying to take three things away from us: our nuclear family, our Judeo-Christian faith foundation, and our history. Those are the three things that we seem to be losing to the progressive left. Those are the things that we need to be standing strong for.
Yeah, when we look back, and I'm going to talk about this later in the program, we look back and often the World War II generation called the greatest generation. But as we just heard, as you made reference to the prayer, there was no hesitancy to acknowledge that a moral, religious foundation was needed in order to have that strength and to display that strength on the world stage, and the fact that we needed God's intervention.
Not only do we need his intervention, we need as one of our founders said, only a virtuous people can know freedom, because we need a civic conscience. We need a governor on ourselves to answer to a higher being, not to government. So it's that faith component that makes us good citizens.
From what you've experienced thus far, what's been the highlight of your trip there to Normandy?
The highlight is seeing the old veterans, and as I've done before, walk among the grave sites and looking at the beach, looking at what they had to cross. It's the entire experience of Normandy, Omaha Beach, the old veterans, and the grave sites. It is a moving experience, Tony. It's just a moving experience.
Yeah, and as was said, we ask for nothing more than the ground to bury those who sacrificed their lives to free France and Europe from the grip of the Nazis. I hate to break this almost sacred moment, but I do want to transition to practical application of things we're talking about, of why it's so important that we preserve this foundation. Yesterday, the House Republicans advanced to the Department of Justice criminal referrals for both Hunter and James Biden for criminal prosecution for making false statements to Congress. Your response?
It's about time. Tony, it's about time. We now know the laptop was not disinformation, as they said years ago. We now know that it is true, and they are covering for the big guy, Joe Biden. And we've searched for a way to force a lawless president to obey the law. The rule of law is the foundation that you were just addressing. So absolutely, it's about time we did this.
We're losing that element of trust in our system. And, of course, I was talking with the chairman of the Judiciary Committee earlier today, Jim Jordan, and there's only so much Congress can do. In fact, moving forward with contempt charges against the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, you hold the purse strings, but beyond that, there's very little that Congress can do other than bring awareness and make this an election year issue.
Well, Tony, we do hold the power of the purse. That's what we have been unwilling to do. We've got to start with clawing back Article I authority the lawmaking and then forcing them to obey the law, to enforce the law as the executive branch is supposed to do by using the power of the purse.
By cutting off their funds. And of course, we're in the, once again, in the appropriations process, and we'll see how, how determined Republicans are to use that leverage as we move into this election year. I want to get your response to this as well. Yesterday, House Speaker Mike Johnson appointed Congressman Scott Perry, former chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, and Congressman Ronnie Jackson to highly sought-after positions on the House Intelligence Committee, which includes oversight of intelligence gathering agencies. Do you think that this could help bring a little more confidence into the intel community by having two very strong conservatives on that committee?
Well, it should, and I think it will, because we've got two more strong conservatives, as you said, on the oversight of the intel community. And given what we did with the FISA bill, expanding the government's authority, the FBI authority to spy on Americans, this is exactly what we needed. I applaud the Speaker for it, and I look forward to their work on the Intelligence Committee.
What are you most concerned about that you will, beyond the FISA reauthorization, that you hope that they will be able to dig down on?
The intelligence that the Chinese are gathering across America in every aspect. We need to close that down so that China cannot collect intelligence across the spectrum of America.
Why do you think that there's been a reluctance to take on China from at least? I know occasionally you hear the FBI director will talk about China, but there seems to be a reluctance in our intel community. Why?
Everything is politicized these days, Tony. If you remember, in order to get FISA reauthorized, the chairman of the committee released what was classified information. That is not the way to do. And as you were saying, we're losing faith in our institutions. We've got to reinstitute the rule of law, even in the intel community.
Yeah. Congressman Keith Self, always great to see you. Thank you so much for taking time away from the activities there in Normandy to join us here on Washington Watch.
Thank you so much, Tony.
All right. Texas Congressman Keith Self. We do need to recognize and look back, and things weren't perfect, all right? They clearly weren't perfect. But when you have a president of the United States leading the nation in prayer, asking for God's help and provision, it sure is a stark contrast to what we have today. And we're going to talk about this later in the program, but I believe that our spiritual strength, our moral goodness is directly intertwined and related to our greatness as a country. All right, after the break, this special 80th anniversary Washington Watch, author Jerome Corsi joins me to look at how God influences the outcomes of righteous wars. And we're going to talk about God's intervention and how we saw the evidence of that in World War II and the role that the Christian faith played, not just faith, but faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, how that played out in World War II. Don't go away.
Download the new Stand Firm app for Apple and Android phones today and join a wonderful community of fellow believers. We've created a special place for you to access news from a biblical perspective, read and listen to daily devotionals, pray for current events, and more. Share the Stand Firm app with your friends, family, and church members, and stand firm everywhere you go.
Sometimes the headlines are overwhelming, and it feels like we're all alone and there is nothing we can do. That is exactly what the enemy wants us to believe. Reading through the Bible, there are many things that are counterintuitive. One of them is that God never uses a majority. It is always a minority devoted to the truth. Here at Family Research Council, we are grateful to stand side by side with other believers for the truth. And as a result, God is making a difference. When you partner with us, you are joining with Christians around the nation in standing together for the truth of God's Word, supplying pastors and parents and school boards with training and resources to stand up against the indoctrination of our children. Together, with God's help, we can preserve freedom for the next generation. Go to frc.org and become a STAND member today.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion in Normandy. Now, if you're joining with us in the Family Research Council Stand on the Word Bible reading plan, you've recently read several biblical examples of the Lord leading the Israelites to victory in battle despite seemingly impossible odds. The Bible makes clear that God is involved in the lives of his people and he intervenes. So how did divine intervention and the role of the Christian faith influence the outcome of World War II? Joining me now to discuss this, Dr. Jerome Corsi, author of No Greater Valor, The Siege of Bastogne, and the Miracle That Sealed Allied Victory. Dr. Corsi, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to see you again.
It's great to be back with you, Tony. Thank you very much. God bless.
Before we dive into the history, I just want to get your reflections, your thoughts on this 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion.
Well, it's a very emotional day for me. I was raised by the World War II generation. My father was in Army Air Force during World War II. And this is a day we owe so much to those who gave their lives on D-Day and so many other battles in American history. I mean, it makes me emotional just to think about it, quite frankly. And freedom is not free. Ronald Reagan reminded us of this. It can be lost in one generation. And to me, I wrote this book, No Greater Valor, to answer the question of whether or not God intervenes in human affairs, the very question you posed to begin with, Tony. And I resolved, after studying this battle, and I put intensive study in this battle. I was in the National Archives. I actually went to the 101st headquarters, at their current camping headquarters, and looked at the museum, spent a considerable amount of time at the museum. They have a Bastogne museum. And I did an enormous amount of research for this book, and I really did conclude that God does intervene. And even thinking about it today, it does make me emotional to reflect on what I concluded and the work I put into this book to elucidate that story.
Well, and I've read your book, and I found it fascinating, and that's why I want to have this conversation today, because, in fact, in just a few moments, I'm going to have a World War II veteran who was at the Battle of the Bulge. He's in his late 90s, but he's going to join us momentarily. There was evidence that God did intervene at that very turning point where Hitler made his, he pushed back after the D-Day invasion, the Battle of the Bulge. That was really the most decisive point in World War II, was it not?
It was. I mean, it began on a Saturday, December 16th, 1944. It was just 9 days before Christmas, and the Germans opened up with this enormous artillery barrage. And at 5:30 in the morning, the Wehrmacht came through the Argonne forest. We did not know, the American soldiers had not gotten any idea that the Germans had amassed this massive, tank and artillery attack as a last ditch to try to save Hitler from defeat. And so when this onslaught came through the Argonne, everyone in our lines was not ready for it. We had been pretty much in a stand down going into winter quarters. And it turned out that this one little town of Bastogne, which had these highways crossing through it in Belgium, became a center point, because if you could hold that town, you could hold the roads that were needed for the Germans to advance. And their whole idea was to advance up to Antwerp, to cut off the American supplies and to try to negotiate a peace. So in the very first hours of this, when the battle starts, the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, were in bivouac at a place called Camp Mermelon, and the attack came through, and Eisenhower and Bradley and the command said, who do we have we can send quickly to Bastogne to relieve these troops, because we've got to hold Bastogne. So the call went out to the 101st and bivouac, and they said, we're going to send trucks up there, and you guys better get ready because you're going to Bastogne. At first, they didn't know for sure where they were going, but they knew they were headed in that direction. Well, it turned out that the general commanding the 101st, Maxwell Taylor, was back in Washington briefing the Pentagon, and the commander, it was General McAuliffe. It turned out to be the exact right commander, because he had served in the American Expeditionary Force in World War I. He was an artillery commander. He was extremely good with artillery, but he wasn't the commander. Now, when the order came, they did not have winter clothes. They pulled up all kinds of trucks. They were assembling whatever weapons they could get. And McAuliffe got in a command car, and he had the intelligence with his command unit to drive off. He was going to say, where are we going? He wanted to get there first. That was critical in the battle. He knew to show up. But the Americans in the night, traveling from Camp Mermelon up into Belgium to get to Bastogne, all of our troops were fleeing in the middle of the night. And our troops in these trucks, 101st, going into battle, did not have winter equipment. And the troops leaving battle, they asked them for their weapons. They asked them for their clothing. They were scavenging because they had nothing going into battle. So that's the first real miracle, in fact, that when General McAuliffe got to Bastogne, he was headed to the wrong place, and they stopped him. The sentry stopped him and said, General, you're going to Bastogne, and it's only right over here. So he got to Bastogne first, and he picked out the exact right place for the 101st to bivouac when they got there. And that next morning, he sent them into battle. And it was a remarkable story because he was an artillery commander, not the one who should have been the commander. He set up the defense of Bastogne like a castle. He put all of his artillery in the center. So wherever the Germans attacked, he could pivot the artillery to meet that attack. And that was the first miracle. He should not have been the commander. He was the commander. He got there. He managed to fight off the Germans, and he held. And then as it got into winter, and this one of the most horrible winters in history in Europe, in recent history, 1944, the snow was tremendous. Our troops were outnumbered, and McAuliffe began defending Bastogne.
All right, Dr. Corsi, we're up against a break, but I want you to hold right there because we're going to come back. We're going to look at this other miracle. I also want to talk about Patton's prayer, General Patton, and the prayer that he prayed that led to what was evidence of break in the weather. All right, folks, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Jerome Corsi on the other side of the break, so don't go away. This is Washington Watch. Glad to have you with us. Don't go away.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion in Normandy. My guest carrying over in this segment, Dr. Jerome Corsi, author of No Greater Valor, The Siege of Bastogne, and the Miracle that Sealed Allied Victory. Dr. Corsi, so we got through one miracle. Let's move to the next, and then I want to talk about Patton's prayer. He's not known to be one who would pray, but he really pressed in and challenged the men to pray.
Yes, he did. In fact, so this Battle of Bastogne, they were surrounded. The 101st was completely surrounded by the Germans. They were cut off, and they were using their last supplies, and it was winter, and they were running out of ammunition. So a couple things happened. First of all, Patton said that he was going to relieve the 101st. He was going to bring his Third Army up through the Alps in winter and get to Bastogne and relieve them. And before he left, he had the chaplain. He called the chaplain in and said, "Write me a prayer." Chaplain said, "Well, I can't write you a prayer to win in battle." He said, "Well, write me a prayer for the conditions to be right where we can fight a battle." Chaplain read the prayer, and Patton had that prayer printed and handed to every one of the troops in the Third Army coming in this massive advance to save Bastogne. At the same time, in Bastogne, they were encircled, and the Germans came out of their lines on white flags. McAuliffe was sleeping that morning, and they woke him up and said, "General, they're coming in under white flags." Well, McAuliffe, who was surrounded, running out of ammunition, thought they were coming to surrender because they're coming in under white flags. They said, "No, General, they're not coming to surrender. They want you to surrender." And McAuliffe said, "Nuts." Well, so that word, that electrified, they tried to tell, what are we going to tell these Germans? They finally said, "Well, General, what you said to begin with was pretty good." So General wrote "nuts" all over their demand to surrender, and he handed it back. The Germans didn't know what it meant. They said, he's not surrendering, so we're going to take you back to your lines. We're not surrendering. I get emotional every time I tell this story. This electrified U.S. troops around the world. That McAuliffe said "nuts" to the Germans. So Patton is advancing, and the weather, just as they're running out of ammunition at Christmas time, breaks, and the C-47s can come in and do an airlift. And General McAuliffe, they get relieved eventually by Patton, who does break forth. When Patton gets there, General McAuliffe said we didn't need to be relieved. We were fine. Well, this was a remarkable story. I mean, it's still one of the greatest stories of World War II. The heroics of the 101st to be surrounded and to hold out. But the key to the entire story is prayer. They trusted in God, and they prayed to God. And McAuliffe, when it was over, said, God won this victory. He attributed the victory to God. That's why I wrote the book. Because in my view, because God did intervene, and we were on the right side of God at this time. And in fact, I think it's a lesson for us today that you cannot succeed without God. God is fundamental. God rules.
Right. And Dr. Corsi, when you look at that, and of course I've read your account and I've read other accounts of Patton's prayer, we've disarmed our military in terms of what it takes to win today, where if a general were to print a prayer and pass it out and tell all the men to be praying it, good chance he'd get relieved.
Probably court-martialed. You know, you're not allowed to do that. Well, once we abandon God, God abandons us. And one of the great troubles we are in this country is that we have sinned against God. We've sinned. We've killed millions of babies since Roe v. Wade. Only God can give life. We can't take life away. It's a sin against God. We've taken God out of our schools since the 1940s. When I end my podcast, I end it every day saying the remedy to this is 2 Chronicles 7:14. We've got to get down on our knees and ask God for forgiveness for letting this country get to this point. And I say, well, God will hear our prayer and heal our land. That's what 2 Chronicles 7:14 says. God will do 90% of the work, just as God did in the Battle of Bastogne. If it had not stopped snowing, the troops in Bastogne would have run out of ammunition and they'd have been overwhelmed before Patton got there.
And the significance of that to the entire war effort?
Because this battle was electrifying. I went back and read the New York Times reports on the reports that were coming to the troops. I went into the archives. This was a internationally celebrated battle that lifted us in saying we can make the final push and we can defeat Hitler. Because Hitler could have won the Battle of Bastogne. We could have lost World War II. We were caught unawares. Hitler had the upper hand. And it took the bravery of these people at Bastogne and Patton and his troops. There was great heroic effort made here. People sacrificing lives in the middle of winter, freezing to death, running out of food, running out of ammunition, but yet praying, trusting in God. And that was the ultimate victory. This was a great indication of World War II, one of the many instances of miracles, but the one most celebrated because it was the most impossible. This was an impossible victory, and McAuliffe and those troops pulled it off with the help of God and Jesus Christ, to whom they prayed every moment of that battle. And it was my honor to write this book, and it still makes me emotional to recall the story. It always did. From the time I was a child, I heard this story, and I resolved to write this book when I was about 10 years old, and I finally got the chance to do it. I thank God for that chance.
Well, it's an amazing book. No Greater Valor, The Siege of Bastogne and the Miracle That Sealed Allied Victory. Dr. Jerome Corsi, always great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us on this special day.
Thank you, Tony. God bless, and great honor to all the men and women who fought in World War II and secured our freedom.
Absolutely.
Thank you, God.
And coming up next, a veteran of D-Day joins me here on Washington Watch after the break. Stay tuned. Straight ahead.
America was a bright light until the culture gave into darkness. But we won't. We're in a battle for the soul of our nation, between right and wrong, between truth and lies. At a time when the mainstream media is blocking Americans from truth, millions are searching for a source of trustworthy news that shines a light in the darkness. At this time of great need, FRC is lighting the way forward. For 40 years, Family Research Council and its partners have stood together to advance and defend biblical truth in government and culture. Between our flagship broadcast program, Washington Watch with Tony Perkins, to our news outlet, The Washington Stand, FRC is providing believers across the country with news they can trust from a biblical worldview. When you stand with FRC, you help light the way forward for America and the next generation. Go to frc.org/give.
Jesus said in John 15, "These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full." In 2024, in these divided and uncertain times, how can this be possible? By abiding in Him through His Word. At Family Research Council, we want to help you do that, which is the reason for the Stand on the Word Bible reading plan. In just 10 to 15 minutes each day, you will have read the entire Bible in just 2 years. But more importantly, you will be abiding in Him daily. Find our Bible reading plan at frc.org/Bible. And join Tony Perkins each weekday for a 10-minute devotional inspired by the daily reading and designed to encourage you on this journey through the Bible. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And remember, the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever.
Research has found that there are 59 million American adults who are a lot like you. There are millions of people around the country who are born again, deeply committed to practicing their faith, and believe the Bible is the reliable Word of God. But that's not all. They're also engaged in our government. They're voters. They're more likely to be involved in their community, and they're making a difference in elections. The problem is that a lot of them feel alone too. We want to change that. FRC wants to connect these 59 million Americans to speak the truth together, no matter the cost. If you want to learn more about this group and what it means to be a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative, or if you want to find out if you are one of these sage cons yourself, join us. Go to frc.org/SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more. That's SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm Tony Perkins, your host. Well, 80 years ago today, 73,000 Americans, 61,715 Britons, and 21,400 Canadians crossed the English Channel and landed on 5 beaches in the French province of Normandy, northwest of Paris. 23,000 airborne troops were dropped behind enemy lines. The massive scale of the logistical operations supporting the invasion is almost beyond comprehension. One of those soldiers from that day, 80 years ago, joins me now. I am pleased to welcome World War II veteran Fred Lunsford. Mr. Lunsford, welcome to the program.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
What theater of World War II did you serve in, sir?
ETO, European Theater of Operation.
And Mr. Lunsford, you were there at Normandy. Tell us about your D-Day experience.
Okay, I'll tell you how it is. Now, understand that I make you about, I'm a 99-year-old, and I'm blind and I'm deaf as well, but I'll try to describe this as briefly as I possibly can. I know I don't have much time, but I want to try to do it the best I can. I was just 20, let's see, that was in 44, yeah. I was 19-year-old. And we, on July the 6th, 80 years ago today, I was aboard a ship out of the English Channel.
July or June?
Huh?
Was it July or June?
June.
Yeah.
June the 6th.
Yeah.
I was out in the English Channel, in the ship. Now, we loaded on the ship the night before. The night was 80 years ago last night. We loaded on the ship. No, we loaded on the ship the night before. We loaded on the ship. We was on the ship during the 6th. During the 6th we was. And then we landed on Omaha Beach. Right just as daylight was coming. We went over, anchored the ship, and went down a rope ladder from the ship into Higgins' boat. The Higgins boat was a landing craft that run up on the sand in the front and fell down. And then we all got our packs on our back, rifles strapped on our back, and waded the water about waist deep for a brief period of time. And onto the beach we went. As I saw the blood-stained sand, I never wanted to see it anymore. And still today, every time I go to the beach, all I can see is blood-stained beach sand. And I don't like to go. Therefore, I don't go. But anyway, that's where we landed, and we headed for the incline going up at the edge of the beach. And we was under gunfire from the Germans and the Americans. We had battleships out in the English Channel and other ships that was firing in, and then we had pockets set up that had took over, and we had some friendly fire too. So they had a time of making distinction whether they shot the right people. But anyway, I was just telling my partner here, she is my partner, she does all this stuff for me. I can't do it. But anyway, I was telling her, just before we come on, I saw the first grave. I saw this first body buried in that cemetery there in Normandy. And she said, what about it? How did it do? They took the dog tags off from around the neck, put one in the mouth and the other in a bag, and with a number on it. And then they went with that number for the burial. Then they put that body in a body bag or a mattress cover and tied it in of it. And he went in with the rest of the pile with the bulldozer blade pushing them in to a big old ditch and covered them up. That's how the first graves were buried, and they had to be buried fast. But I saw that with my own eyes. What a horror it was. I've been preaching the gospel now, well over 70 years. And I've stood with many families that have stood in grief, that sent away a young man in his blood my life and come back in a box. And their grief was horrible. That's the ones I'm praying for. I'm praying that God will give them comfort and pleasure. That's the only way, the only comfort we could get is from our eternal Father.
Yes.
So with that, I don't guess you want to hear anymore.
Well,
but that was a horrifying thing. Well, one more thing. As you're going up the incline, that steep bluff at the edge of the beach, why there was a bullet hit my friend that was walking one step behind me, and it hit him in the right side of his head, and he fell flat on his face. Dead, this is no real. And I'm of the opinion that bullet was intended for me because it was just inches behind the back of my head and hit him right in the side of the head. So I know it was intended for me. But God spared me and brought me back. And I never dreamed I would be living 99 years.
Well, Mr. Lunsford,
it is from God.
Yes, it is, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for not only being a warrior on the battlefield, but I know you're a prayer warrior as well. And I want to thank you for preaching the gospel and praying and understanding that freedom comes at a very high price. And thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for joining us today.
God bless.
And as a reminder, 99 years old. Looks back 80 years ago, and as you can tell in his description, it's just as real today as it was 80 years ago when he went on to Omaha Beach. When we look at where we are today, as we were talking about earlier, America's strength on the battlefield, its standing internationally, is intertwined with our moral foundation. What does the future look like, given where we are today? Well, joining me now as we finish out our conversation, Mark Levecki. He is a distinguished scholar of ethics, war, and public life at Providence Institute of Religion and Democracy, and a non-resident research fellow at the U.S. Naval War College in the College of Leadership and Ethics. Mark, thanks so much for joining us today as we look back on this historic day 80 years ago. Tell us, I think you just heard the conversation I had with a World War II veteran, 99 years old. What do you make of that day 80 years ago?
Right. Well, first of all, it's an incredible privilege to follow Mr. Lunsford. He's why we're here, right? He's why we are enjoying the freedoms that, as you said, come at a tremendous cost. Freedom is not free. What do I make of 80 years ago? I think you could take your bearings from General George Marshall's orders to General Eisenhower. They were very simple, but they were profound. He said, cross the channel, enter the heartland of Germany, and free the continent of Europe. And with those orders launched the beginning of the end of World War II, at least in Europe. And I think these words of General Marshall's can be coupled with Churchill's. And Churchill's words came at a far earlier point in the conflict when not everything, or not when anything was certain. They had just left Dunkirk. It was a tremendous rescue, but it was also in many ways a defeat for the free world. But Churchill was looking forward even at that point, and he said that he looked forward to the day in God's time when the new world, with all its power and might, would step forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old. And I think in those two things, you have encapsulated the responsibilities of American power. we're very uncomfortable with power nowadays, especially or including or especially within the Christian community. But power is essential. God has power. Power is a good. It could be used for good. It could be used for evil. But without it, nothing happens. And it was American power and willingness to stand with our allies that helped bring about things like D-Day.
Right.
Liberation of the West from totalitarianism. So it's essential.
Mark, you could make an argument that power 80 years ago, which did free Europe and kept the entire globe from coming under the thumb of the Nazis and the fascists, but it was tethered to truth. We opened the program today with the prayer of the president, FDR, leading the nation in prayer. That unlikely would not happen today. America's standing on the national stage historically. Can you separate it from our standing morally before God?
Yeah, there's different ways of saying no to that. The way that I would say no to that, no, you can't separate it, is that I think ultimately our moral bearings come from a sense of objective truth, a sense that there are things in the world that are true, that are good, that are beautiful, and those things aren't up to us. We don't get to decide them, as individuals. We don't get to decide them as a collective. They've been predetermined. The Christian understanding, the Hebraic understanding would be these things emerge out of the character of God. We have no choice about them. We can choose to align ourselves with them, or we could choose to misalign ourselves with them. I think ultimately, you had said in my introduction that I study just war. Just war is a tradition of moral thinking that helps us to determine when war is right to fight. And when we've determined that war is right to fight, how do we rightly fight this war that's right to fight? And within the classical understanding of just war, it is grounded deeply in Christian responsibilities that come out of all the way back into Genesis. We were made in the image of God to exercise dominion. That's part of what it means to be made in the image. And as with individuals, so with government. Hard on the heels of being made in the image of God, we have the fall. And now the exercise of dominion, which is not domination, but stewardship, has to take into account the fact of the fall. And then we move forward from there into the institution of government, which is designed to preserve basic order, peace, and justice for the political community. And all those things are grounded ultimately in a Hebraic understanding of what it means to be responsible in the world.
Mark, we're almost out of time. I could have this conversation for the next hour, but have we lost that understanding?
Yeah, well, I think in a lot of quarters we have lost it. I'm wearing a shirt from West Point. There are quarters in our country that have not lost it, that are very confident of where this comes from. And that's not to say that, everyone standing on freedom's wall between us and the wolves has Hebraic understanding. But there are a lot of us that still understand we breathe, biblical air, and it gives us our mandate for moving responsibly in the world. But absolutely, that is increasingly at risk. And I think you see it. Americans sometimes are concerned about our greatness. We're not so concerned about our goodness.
Absolutely. But we can't be great unless we're first good. And,
no, that's absolutely
And we
absolutely
have,
true.
Those who understand it must exercise it and speak it. And I appreciate the fact that you're doing it. We're out of time. Mark Levesque, thank you so much. We'll continue this conversation another time.
Well, thanks for having it today. I'd love to be back.
All right. And folks, thank you for joining us as well. And once again, I leave you with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you can do, when you've prayed, prepared, and taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com.